This is the weekly release managers meeting. This is our first session in a reoccurring weekly meeting that we will, as a release team, between user experience, engineering, product management, leverage as a point to come together synchronously once a week to make sure that we are connected, able to steer our product in the right direction, and just make sure that we're accelerating important topics and meeting our objectives from our roadmap. So with that said, what I want to do is open up the topic to talking about what our standing agenda is best aligned as between the group to make sure that we are accomplishing our objectives. So I'm going to share my screen here, and given this is our first meeting, I wanted to open it up. So what does the team think should be the core standing agenda? All right, nobody go at once.
I guess I don't know if this is actually makes sense in this context or not. I'll just start talking. But you know, I think like, you know, sort of standing agenda items would just be anything from any of these departments that is going to sort of impact our work for that week, maybe, or you know. I'm just thinking of currently there's one thing that I have on here about this Redis investigations, which is going to impact engineering's availability probably for the next few days or something. So, you know, any sort of call outs to things like that that are, you know, from our various departments that the rest of the team might not know about. So engineering is doing these things. I should come and share that. UX is maybe doing something else that might have an effect on what we're doing. Same thing with product. So just sort of like awareness check-ins from each of our areas.
Okay, sort of like just a round table.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that from my side, it's also would be nice to kind of double check if we, it's kind of related to what Darby just said, but that our priorities are aligned, that if the priorities change or if there's something that we think that needs more attention, that we bring the discussion topic like to management level instead of going back and forth in the issues. I think it would be nice to have this as a point as well.
Okay, so confirm priority overall product delivery. Okay.
I guess something else, this sort of comes from one-on-ones, but are there high-level metrics like as a group that we're tracking that we want to just check in on? Is it, I don't know, delivery or, you know, anything else? I guess we could even sync up on like product metrics, utilization and things like that, but just to sort of check in week over week, how are we progressing in certain areas? That's probably valuable.
I really like that. And I think that's, I think one of the things that I would add is checking in on our, and maybe this goes kind of line what you're saying, Hannah, but sort of our roadmap and, you know, top product objectives slash OKRs for the upcoming releases, maybe past. So like what I would think is the way I would shape it up, Darby, I think all this comes together really nicely is I think, and I'll make a proposal. I think if we open up our product roadmap and our OKRs and our metrics, and we talk through those 2 items to validate the hypothesis that we're building on items we ship, and then how does that connect to our roadmap, and then what's going to block us from meeting our OKRs or objectives, would sort of dump out that impacts delivery top risks for this week. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's kind of, I think that's in line with what I was thinking. And then we're, it also sort of like brings that to the forefront too. We've got these priorities, we're measuring them in some way, we're reflecting on it on a regular basis. I think that's going to reinforce the importance of those things, and then also, keep us, I guess, sort of, keep us from getting distracted by other things that might pull us away from like what our goal is for the quarter.
Yeah. Okay, and then as far as the metrics, Darby, I think one of the things that you had started to do is some kind of dashboard. Now, was that intended to maybe for all of us to sort of start to build that for release?
So I'll put a link to the dashboard in here. I guess this was sort of an initial attempt. Jason and I worked on these, like sort of defining the metrics here. And then, let's see, I'll just put this down here. And then figuring out how we were going to collect them. And there was a whole process involved in that. So this is a very first pass at like what a dashboard would look like. We should probably reevaluate if these are the right metrics that we want to track and all of that. But yeah, the idea was to have some visibility into utilization and like how customers are using these different features. Because I think it's we can look at our list of product features that we own for release, and there's a bunch of different stuff, deployments and environments and feature flags. But then knowing like what the customer impact is, like Pages, for example, has a lot more utilization than feature flags. So, like things we do there might be more impactful than other areas. So it was kind of to visualize some of that for, for some of us who are new and don't really know, how big these different features are. But then charting it over time is also obviously useful. I got the dashboard to load here for me, and there's a few things that I still want to follow up on with the data team, because there's some weird dips and gaps in the data, and I think they're still maybe working through some things on their side. But at least having a dashboard as a place to reference would be pretty useful.
Okay. So I'm putting up just above this, kind of collecting our thoughts here of what this would look like. So one, just to check in with our roadmap and OKRs, taking a look at our metrics and dashboard, validating our current week release priority, and then risks adjustments based on that priority. How's that sound?
I think that's a good place to start.
Okay.
In GitLab fashion, we can call it an MVC and always change it later.
Yep. All right. In fact, there you go, MVC. Is MVC code for draft? Just kidding. Because we don't do draft. Okay. Next topic, and then I think what we'll do is any working topics that we like team topics that we want to do that are beyond just our deliverables, that maybe are fine tuning operationally, or how we work together, things like that. Did Arit jump off? Did we lose her? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, I hope everything's okay. Okay. So I think that's pretty basic. I think we can move on for that call in MVC. I did want to touch on a topic that's pretty near and dear to me. And I know, Darby, you're working on an issue to propose 1-week iterations. The sooner I feel like we get into, oh, Arit, you're back. Okay, good. Arit, if you have any input, we landed on for our standing agenda, roadmap, OKR reviews, metrics, our current week release team priority, and then risks or adjustments.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had really shaky internet, so like I missed the last 4 or 5 minutes.
Don't worry about it. I just wanted to catch you up, and if you want to come back and make notes when you have internet, and you can, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, cool. All right, so with that said, Darby, and team, I just feel like the sooner we get into sort of what the left and right hand are doing, and the cadence that we're doing it, the easier it is going to be for us to get our grounding and have a good product team flow. Does that make sense? So I have put together just a sort of, no, I didn't want Periscope data. I put together sort of a proposal, and I think it definitely needs work, but I wanted to kind of share it and then get the team's perspective on how we could maybe, wow, that's really zoomed in. Let's try to zoom out. I just want to zoom in a little bit. Here we go. All right, can everybody see that? Cool. So this is completely open for discussion. It sort of leverages dual track agile and a little bit of what they call continuous exploration, which is part of the continuous delivery life cycle. And so I'm throwing this up here, and I put dates up here as just like an example of how we might fit in a weekly cadence and kind of just pace for each milestone or release, even though I don't know if we're going to always have the monthly releases in the future based on our ability to deploy continuously. So my thoughts were, you know, from a PM perspective, that Arit and I would come up with our hypothesis or and our, you know, sort of the product objective or issue that we're trying to accomplish, and then one, if it needs user experience, user design research, we would collaborate and research with user experience, or maybe it's customer interviews. But the whole idea is that, you know, based on how long it takes to do user experience research or whatever, I'm guessing a couple of weeks, might be more, that we use the first cycle to kind of start collaborating and researching that hypothesis and how we might, and if it's something that we want to, if it's something that has user demand, how we would approach it, what we're trying to solve for. And then the idea would be to harden that and to pass it to Darby, your team, after, and actually that's wrong, week 1, week 2, week 3, because the dates are off. But, and then from there, that would be sort of that digested time of asking questions for user experience and engineering. So it would be maybe Darby and Hayana, or one or the other. And then we would prototype that the following, by the end of the week, we'd have like a async prototype with the idea that maybe like on August 1st, we'd be ready to know, here are the things that we're going to work on. Here's our scope and capacity and priority focus for the next release. We go through the build and test, and maybe that test is small testing, or how we, like I think that there's still conversations to be had around how we, what our approaches are on some testing in different environments, .com, et cetera. But then we do an asynchronous demo again, follow up on our documentation, adjust copy, and then somewhere around there, set our metrics to deploy, measure, learn, and revise and synthesize for the September release. Did I do that right? Or is it August 22nd? No, I meant September 22nd. So thoughts on this?
I think this all makes sense. I like the I think I think we could actually like decouple the dates from this, just in sort of like maybe to simplify it a little bit. So
Totally.
like basically we have these 5 steps essentially. You know, we do the research, we do some architecture and like, you know, investigation, and then we prototype, build, and then, you know, basically measure and you know, kind of start over from there. But I think like based on things like capacity and you know, results of any of these, like you might kick it back a step if you get to prototyping and you realize, oh wait, this isn't going to work. We got to go back and re-architect. Or we do some research, then we do some investigation and then realize, oh wait, that informs our research. So like, it's kind of like the cycle that kind of feeds back to itself, if depending on the outcome of, you know, the next step in the process. So,
so almost like there's a line between here, double arrowed, where it could go back and forth. Yeah, I like that.
And then like in an ideal world, right, we could take a feature and go through all these steps 1 week at a time and then ship something in a release. But in reality, you know, like the build and test might actually take a long time. You know, it could be a large feature, or, you know, we want to try to scope it down so that we're, you know, shipping things in smaller chunks. But in order to get to the measure and learn step, we might need 3 weeks of iteration on building, just because, you know, we can ship something behind a feature flag, but we can't get it to a customer until it's feature complete in a way that is useful to them. So then we can't really learn. We can't really learn from that work until a customer touches it. So it might take more time.
No, I agree.
When we say customer, are we talking about external or internal, or can we have like 2 milestones for that in order to, you know, get the feedback, but maybe not show it to the world yet?
I know where you're going. I like where you're going, Ari, and I think it will depend on what we're shipping.
I agree. I also wanted to ask if there's any room for like A/B testing or for like debating between 2 different solutions. That's something that we want to put into this process as well.
I think that's a really good question. I don't even know if we do any A/B testing right now in our product. Does anyone know?
I don't. Okay.
Sorry, Karina. No, I don't think so. At least from a design point of view, I've seen it like with static prototypes. I don't think with using the product per se.
Okay. So there might be an opportunity for one, a dog food component, as we call it in here, which I think Arit brought up. And then
yes.
And then the second piece is and then second would be A/B testing. And I think, help me understand, but I think, Darby, a lot of that comes from, and you're going to laugh at this, Arit, but I think that some of your mission is to be able to help us do A/B testing in the future with the feature flags capability, et cetera, and the progressive delivery.
Yeah, that sounds like a feature we should build.
Exactly.
I'm pretty sure I saw it somewhere in the documentation.
Yeah, yeah.
So it might be reserved just for documents. I don't know.
No, no. In fact, I think that's something like if that would be an awesome thing to talk with Darby about and like how we can enable that. And that we could easily dog food it through this flow, right?
And then if you want me to go even more crazy, I was thinking maybe we should add another feedback loop to understand once it's deployed, like to understand the usage, if we're going to use breadcrumbs or some kind of feedback from customers, like even after the deployment.
No, agreed. And that's where that measure and learn phase is supposed to be. And then I had this kind of activity called synthesize, and maybe it stands that and every feature is going to have a different maturity progression. Like some it's like the adoption is going to be immediate for specific reasons, and some it's going to be slow. So our ability to like, we just have to keep measuring and learning and synthesize, and that's where the synthesize step comes. And then we, kind of reevaluate our hypothesis and go back to that. Okay, how do we adjust? Does that make sense? Like, I feel like synthesize is looking at our metrics, looking at what we decided to accomplish, revising that roadmap, making a new hypothesis. Okay. All right.
Trying to understand the coming out of prototype. What are the paths out of prototype that would happen?
So, and this is not perfect, but like prototype would actually more likely yield to build and test. And then measure and learn, maybe measure and learn should come out here. The idea is that you can jump from any of these, I think, if it makes sense, but the most is to go collaborate, research, architect, sort of here's a solution, here's our hypothesis, here's a solution intent. They propose a solution, they demo a prototype, and maybe that's the idea, is that there's a demo piece here, and that's what's missing.
Yeah, I guess my question, I guess better stated, is if you're not going to do something in between prototype and build, why prototype? Why not just build, right? Like, I think you prototype to do something with that. That might be a user test, that might be to evaluate, that might be to demo, it might be to like sanity check. But if you're going to go straight from prototype to build, it seems like you're just building at that point.
I'll leave that to Darby. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think so there's there has been a lot of discussion about like having a prototype phase before the build phase, mainly because when we jump right into build, I don't think we're quite ready for, well, one like the complexity isn't really understood in some cases. So we jump into something and think, okay, this, the classic example is, okay, we can get this done in one release. Let's start building it. And then we get into it and realize this is going to take 3 releases or something. But we're already, 2 or 3 weeks into a release at that point. And so we need to, it's like, well, let's just keep driving forward then. And so I think the purpose of a prototyping phase is to uncover the unknowns in what we're trying to build. And then kind of like the output of that is, part of it is like the scope of the feature and like breaking it down a little bit. But then I think, the other sort of outputs of that, and that's why I was kind of saying we could go back to architect before that if we had to, is like we do some prototyping and realize, okay, this is really big. Here's a problem that we're going to run into. Maybe we need to go back to the drawing board and think differently about this feature because of these complexities here or something like that. And so it gives us a checkpoint to say like, all right, are we comfortable moving forward to the next phase of this and actual like building it for real? Or do we need to have some, reevaluate things a little bit more? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think we're saying the same things. Just
Okay.
I'm saying you're saying it positively. I'm saying it negatively. That's my nature. I always approach the problem, not the solution.
So I have a silly question. When we're talking about prototype before build, is that like creating a mock server or something like that? Like,
I think it can be a lot of things. It can be, you know, in some cases, just doing like a proof of concept. You know, like basically build it out without tests and see what it looks like.
so like Happy Flow?
Yeah, that kind of stuff. Or it could just be like, in the case of, you know, some of the ones we're working on for this release, the Vault integration. That's just like a huge unknown. We don't know how to install the Helm charts. We don't know what Vault looks like to run on a server. So all of these things are just going to have to be investigations. And it's like, install the stuff, get it running on a laptop or something, see what the problems are that come out of it. And basically, I think in the case of that one, I think part of the output at least is going to be, you know, here's some documented findings from this prototyping. You know, we spent a week digging into this, and here's what we found. And, you know, and then it's a inflection point to say, do we go forward and start building, or do we need to do more research, or do we need to reach out to some other teams and ask them to help us with something? Or, you know, like, it's basically like, here's how far we got, here's what we did in a week. Now let's go back and kind of reevaluate the next steps from there. So I think there could be a lot of different outputs from that phase.
Yeah, and I think for design, at least, I'm really excited to at least have like a consolidated prototyping phase. I think it will help us a lot to test not just our hypotheses, but also to evaluate them and you know, refine them later on, like what Darby is saying, to learn a bit more about our users, whether this is like with a working prototype, like piece of code, or with just a design mockup. And just kind of a question suggestion. I've seen some other teams doing, I think the Create team, they do like, they break down those phases into multiple issues. Is this something that we are looking at? As in, for example, you have this big feature and each phase, each week happens in separate issues, or do we want to do everything in one single GitLab issue?
I kind of like the idea of separate issues, only because it sort of helps to focus the conversation. I realize that, you know, the downside of that is then you've got information kind of strewn about a bunch of issues for a specific feature.
Wouldn't it be better to put it as part of the workflow, like a column or something?
Well, I was going to think, one of the things I would say, I think one of the things that we should do is, like if I had to think about it, I feel like some of this right here, this collaborate, research, architect, prototype, is a chunk of an issue for a specific focus. And then delivery is actually, you know, doing it, you know, starting to do our rollout and delivery and actually shipping a hardened product. Not 100%, but that's what I'm thinking. And so I'm wondering if we can break it between discovery and delivery, and have like a discovery issue and then the actual, and the reason there's a difference in that is, if you think about it, we have a lot of direction items. And when we communicate to our community, one of the things that I pay attention to is our blog posts. So our blog posts, for example, and this isn't the only reason I do this, but the blog posts show everything that has a direction label on it that we're delivering or shipping. And I wouldn't want our discovery items to be on that list for the blog post. So I might say, this is our discovery issue. And then once we get to landing something that is with direction and aligned with our OKR that we've prototyped and we want to ship, then we would open the issue to ship with that direction label, so that it's a hardened, we're going to release that. Does that make sense?
I think that's a good breakdown. I think that's a fairly like simple way to iterate into this kind of change. So having a discovery issue and having a delivery issue, that makes it simpler than 5 7, 10 issues that we're trying to juggle things between. But then it also helps, I think, keep the issues a little bit smaller. Like I think that what we've historically done seems like we do one issue for all of this, and we're doing research and discovery and delivery stuff all in one place, and it turns into a 150 page issue with 700 comments or something, and then it's really hard to make heads or tails out of anything.
Okay. And yeah, agreed. I think the one thing I want to validate is with Lori Whitaker. She has user experience, UX research. So I want to talk to her about, because she has a user research issue that she opens for things. So I want to talk to her about this flow a little bit and doing that. That might help. What I would say is I want to go back to what Mike Nichols says, if that's okay, to kind of validate. So actually, let me close my thought. So the second thought is, if we can break it down by discovery and delivery, work one issue for discovery, one for delivery, connect the two in some way, one with direction label, one with not, needs to be validated with Lori Whitaker from a research perspective. If we get her buy-in on that, then I think we're good. Now I want to close out on what Mike Nichols, you were talking about the problem to solve. And we should have started with that. I think that we've just had this conversation so many times that we're just here. But I think for me, the perspective, and I think it's important that we call the problem to solve out by doing this and what we're measuring to show that it's working, is we're trying to improve our success in shipping. So a specific metric that I identified was just going through our kickoff documents is the last 3 releases. Our average shipping to commitment is 36%. The target previously for product was 70% plus. I think they're asking it be 100% now. What I would put as a proposal of a validation that this is starting to work is that the measurements are, we see less confusion, we see more building versus versus like a lot of stop and go. So we're improving our flow, we're getting more efficient, improving our velocity. 2, that ship to release, that ship to versus commitment percentage goes up at least 70% by 12.3 and continues to steady and move up as we move into this process.
I think, Karina, we could also look into the duration between ideation and the actual delivery. I think that would be really interesting to measure as well. I don't know what the target would be, but it would be interesting to start looking at it.
What would, say that again?
So I think an interesting measurement to look at is the duration or the total number of days between ideation and until the actual delivery.
Yes.
Because yeah, okay.
No, and I think that the call out there from my perspective is that we might take longer in ideation, but if our delivery is picking up speed because of that, and we're spending less time talking and more time shipping and our velocity increases to shipping, I think that's an important measurement.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the goal needs to be, but I think it's good to start tracking it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is also where we bring UX research to help us find the customer goals and work into all those different contexts a bit. Of course, we need Lori to give her input, but also to decide what is the research methods that we're going to use to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
My assumption is that this flow is in a like per issue basis. How do these play with each other? Because say we had 5 issues, could there be, you know, 1 in each of these stages simultaneously? Would these just kind of flow, you know, continuously? I guess is my question, is how they interact with each other. So engineering might be in all 5 of these phases all the time. User experience might be in all 5 phases of these at the same time.
Depending on the issue. Yeah, it's, I think from my perspective, that's the idea, is that, you know, the hypothesis that's put out there has a discovery and a delivery phase, right? Or a discovery and delivery component. And though the cadence of different discovery and delivery, the cadence of different hypotheses are going to fall potentially at different times. One of the things that I was trying to propose here with the dates was that we're doing some of this in a rhythm that allows us to land on scope and capacity on the 1st for now. We're doing something that lands us to be ready to ship for release. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah.
Did I answer your question, I guess?
I think so. You know, I mean, as we're doing it today, we're doing it like all issues kind of move lumped together by milestone, right? I could see this causing a shift that, you know, and this issue might need to go through the loop of the hypothesis a few times, right? So it might get out of cadence with another one. And I'm just making sure that that's okay, and maybe that's even the intent here.
So the way that I've been thinking about this, and why I think this is so valuable to predictable delivery for us, is that essentially, like, the discovery phase of this whole flow is done like pre-release commitment. So, like, we're figuring out what we're going to build, we're scoping it, we're understanding it before we even commit to it in a release. And so then when we hit the 1st, we know that, all right, these are the things we're going to commit to for, you know, 12.4 or whatever it is. And we have a much more confident understanding of what we can do in these 4 weeks to get it to that date. And maybe we've already started working on it even. And so, like, then we sort of decouple, like, this work from the monthly release cycle even. So, like, this stuff can kind of happen out of band. And so we've got like one flow, which is this, and we're just doing our work, and we're, you know, working through these steps in a priority order or whatever. And then there's this other cycle, which is we have a release on the 22nd every month and a kickoff call on the 7th or the 8th or whatever. And we just pick the things for that kickoff call that we are confident that we're going to ship by that date. And because of what we know from this cycle, and once we get some practice into it, like, we'll be very confident in what we can deliver. And so I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Okay.
So in a way, we really need to be aligned with our roadmap in that, and see, like, what are the most critical functionalities or features that we want to focus on, to also dedicate time to do the hypothesis, do like the I don't know how to call this, pre-grooming, product discovery, or whatever thing people decide to call that. And because one of my concerns is that what I've seen in the past couple of months, a couple of milestones, that the priorities switch a lot. So how are we going to deal with doing the discovery phase, doing the research, and working on prototyping and assumptions? And what if this issue, this functionality gets pushed out? Do we just stop and jump into something else? Or it should be like part of the cycle that, like what Max said, we're working on multiple things on sometimes the same phase at the same time, and we just have to choose which ones get prioritized.
I think like any of these can get blocked by capacity at any point too, right? Like, if we're doing discovery and we feel like a thing is ready to go, but we just don't have any engineers to work on it, then it's going to get blocked, you know. And so then the priority the effect happens there. So I think it's all about, like, I don't know, correct me, Karina, if I'm speaking incorrectly, but I feel like chunking this stuff out into these phases gives us like clear sort of like output from a phase that can then be picked up either next week when that phase starts, or maybe a month later if we don't have capacity to work on it, or priority shift or whatever. And there may be cases where we have to go back and restart a step because it's been 8 months since we did that previous step, and you know, the lay of the land has changed in the code base so much. But
because I see this as a risk. I've heard this before from other teams, that they don't want people working too many milestones ahead because of these risks. So just to raise a flag on that. And I think that maybe, Mike, this is for us in the future, is we can kind of break down these phases that we see on Karina's screen to what would that mean for design. It's like inside this cycle, what are we doing? Talk about
So just a little point that I wanted to mention is, I know that we're not really working with story points, but it's important to understand that if we have no capacity at the moment for any developer to take an item, once he or she are free, I think it's important to put the priority to whatever we can, whichever is first before delivery, so that we can be delivering as much content as possible and not like gathering a lot of research and then not getting around to it. So like, just in priority wise, I think the farther along we get in the flow, that should be the priority. Like whatever is ready to go.
Yeah, I agree. I think, so one, yeah, all right, well said. I think, Hayana, to this point, I think this work, I think we're getting more organized around something we should be doing already. Let me put it that way, in this approach. And it is pretty well, I think from what I'm hearing in feedback from different team members and others, observers, is that this discovery process, I know that when I was starting, Jason was like, hey, around the 22nd, you should start kicking up what you're going to have for scope and capacity on the 1st. Then, you know, and so what I think he was thinking, if I had to make an assumption, the way he's presenting that to me, is that this type of work is sort of happening, maybe not the prototype work, but the collaboration and solution approach, etc., are happening before we get to scope and capacity, which shifts user experience or UX to the left a little. But I don't think we're working so far ahead that we're prioritizing everything, right? We're prioritizing what we're going to release, we're prioritizing what we're preparing to release, and we're prioritizing what's coming in from the top of the funnel 3 releases ahead. And I think that when we talk about the priority of things, we have to look at that picture. But then for the release, for the scope and capacity, as well as the release, it's what's prioritized and agreed to, and we have capacity for. And that shouldn't change. That's the whole gain of this and what we're trying to solve. By calling out the discovery phase has to potentially happen first, that when we get to delivery, we feel highly confident that we can commit and ship, versus saying, yeah, I think I can do this, I think it's small, and then getting in there and realizing that we've got like 5 large issues.
Yes, I agree.
Does that make sense, Hayana?
Yes, it does.
Okay. So I guess, Darby, what do you feel about like me taking this and opening up an issue to start talking about our weekly iteration process? Or do you want to still do that?
No, I like this. I think this puts a lot more structure around what I was trying to communicate in that doc. And I think this, I think let's go ahead and like move forward with this. I think this captures most of what I was hoping to get out of it. So, and then I think it adds a lot of the other concerns that I was missing.
Okay. The one thing I would say is asynchronously, if we can, I think Orit made a good point of like, one, let's lock down how we do discovery versus delivery issue. Let's, make sure we know how we communicate, we're flowing through this. And maybe we just asynchronously talk in the issue about that.
I think I think it's worth mentioning that we've already kind of started an example of this in this release, because we have these two research spikes, which I think is essentially the discovery layer of this as a test.
Yeah, I agree. I just think we have the opportunity to get just more concrete so that people can understand where we're at just by looking in.
Yeah, definitely. I think those are speaking to this same flow, but without the structure that we have that you're describing here. So
cool.
And a request on that, I'm not sure if that's what you mentioned, Darby, but Corinne, if you can move this to a merge request, and then we can have this in the handbook, so that we can also comment not only on docs, but have this as a single source of truth, even if it's not final. So we always start with a merge request.
Yeah, I'm wondering, and that's a good question because I'm new. Like, should this be merged into how we do product, or should we test this first? What?
Karina, I'm new is mine now until someone new comes.
Why did you say?
I said that I'm new is mine until someone newer comes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, fair. No, what I would say is, does it make sense to start this as an issue, validate our hypothesis, and then do a merge request?
No, we start with a merge request always. So it doesn't, you can put somewhere in the handbook under engineering release, and then we decide to move, but always starts with a merge request.
Okay. So Darby, does this go under, where does this go, you think? Where do we think this belongs?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we would put it in the handbook somewhere under probably product.
Product. Okay.
Yeah. So I will say this starts with a merge request thing is kind of new, and it's a little weird. But I think it's okay to just like write it up as a sort of a placeholder as a merge request to the handbook that says like, this is a, work in progress or something like that. It doesn't have to say like, this is how everyone does product here at GitLab now, but making it as like a concrete deliverable to the handbook, even if it's described as a work in progress, I think is okay. And then we can just put it in under some section in there about product workflows. Okay,
cool.
Yeah, I just linked the handbook page that talks about it. I think it's a good starting point. We can move whatever. I saw that the configure team, they have a specific page for their own process. Maybe we can move into something similar, but yeah, just so you know, all the new people.
That's a good idea. Put it as a part of like the release area in the handbook. I like that.
Yeah. All right, cool. I have 7:20. I think we only had till 7:20. In fact, we went a little over. Okay, guys. This was super productive. I'll get the issue open, and then we'll kick up next week as well. I'll stop recording, and have a great day.